Jon Snow stood upon the battlements of Storm's End, watching as gulls wheeled in wide arcs over the greenish-gray waters of Shipbreaker Bay. The sea was restless, crashing in foamy surges against the old stone walls at the foot of the fortress. Beyond the horizon, clouds gathered in languid clusters, thickening with a hint of distant thunder. The wind that gusted through the parapets tasted of salt and brine, and it carried the promise of storms to come. Despite the tumult in the air, Jon felt an unfamiliar sense of settled purpose within himself, something he had sought for so long, yet always found elusive as a half-known dream. From the corner of his eye, he caught a glimpse of steel and black fur. Ghost padded quietly beside him, the direwolf's muzzle lifted to drink in the scents of the sea. They had both traveled a harrowing journey, north of the Wall, into the tumult of wars, and now deep into the Stormlands on a path that fate itself seemed to have laid. The battered ramparts of Storm's End bore the marks of centuries of conflict, from Robert's rebellion to the War of the Five Kings. Yet it remained formidable, a monument to House Baratheon's resilience. It was here, under these ancient stones, that Jon Snow, the once disregarded bastard of Winterfell, was to wed a Baratheon princess and attempt to forge a bond strong enough to secure the Stormlands against the ever-looming shadow of Lannister power. He could hardly believe it himself. The arrangement had been born of necessity and sealed by an agreement that was, at first, uneasy. But House Baratheon needed a strong ally. The Stormlands had been battered by the War of the Five Kings. Now, with King's Landing still in the hands of the Lannisters, Cersei's golden lions prowling among the throngs of courtiers and opportunists, there was reason to fear renewed hostilities. The Princess Jon was to marry had been kept out of the capital, raised within the rocky cradle of Storm's End, and now served as a symbol for all those who refused to bend the knee to Lannister tyranny. She was the last hope of Baratheon pride in these unsettled times. The day of the wedding dawned, gray and ragged, after a night of howling winds and storm-swept ramparts. The great hall of Storm's End had been cleared of its usual austere furnishings. Sturdy oaken tables were draped in pale cloth, and the banners of House Baratheon, black stag upon a golden field, were hung alongside the dire wolf of House Stark, reminding all who attended that this was no hasty or whimsical union but a strategic alliance meant to bind the North to the Stormlands. The fire in the hearth crackled with insistent warmth, casting orange light across the worn flagstones. Torches flickered in the corners. Servants, bustling in and out, arranged food upon the tables. Roasted boar, suckling pig, trenchers of bread, platters of steaming vegetables, casks of hearty ale, and the heady red wine from the arbor. Jon stood at the head of the hall, clad in black finery trimmed with silver thread, reminiscent of his origins in the North, yet bearing the faint suggestion of regal authority. Though he'd never imagined himself in such a role, each passing day drew him deeper into the complex tapestry of the southern courts. His hair, dark curls grown longer than he once wore them, was brushed back from his forehead, and he had tried his best to keep a calm visage. Too many eyes were upon him for him to indulge the swirl of uncertainty that churned within. This arrangement, though outwardly beneficial, felt like stepping onto thin ice. At any moment, old loyalties or fresh betrayals might shatter the fragile peace they were forging. Yet his choice had been made. He was the king in the North no longer, not in any formal sense, but he carried the hopes of Northerners who dreaded a renewed Lannister threat. The princess stepped forward, escorted by one of her household knights. In the flickering glow of the torches, her gown, a deep forest green, caught the light with a subtle sheen that suggested threads of gold woven among the folds. She was tall, as Baratheons often were, and there was a certain regal tilt to her head that spoke of her father's determination. She had her mother's dark hair and the distinctive Baratheon blue eyes. On her brow rested a simple circlet of gold leaves, shaped like the vines one might find twisting among the rocky crags of the Stormlands. Her name was Selyse Baratheon, though many in her family once whispered she had something of Stannis' sternness, Robert's proud courage, and a measure of Renly's charm, all blended in ways that made her an enigma. When her gaze locked with Jon's, it carried a quiet but firm resolve. He saw in her expression a reflection of what he felt, a sense of duty, underscored by a determination that this union be more than a hollow pledge. The Septon began the ceremony, chanting the familiar words that bound man and wife before the seven. Guests crowded behind them, some with genuine joy, others with calculating interest. Davos Seaworth stood near the dais, his loyal presence a reminder that nothing in this alliance had come easily. He had served Stannis Baratheon with unwavering loyalty, and in the aftermath of the war, he had come to support the notion that forging ties with the North might be the best way to stand against the Lannisters' influence. Outside, the tempest rumbled, thunder reverberating through the walls. Lightning flashed across the slit windows, momentarily illuminating the high rafters, and it seemed as though the gods themselves watched with bated breath. Jon felt a tightening in his chest as the ceremony proceeded, and yet he spoke the words, those simple vows that sealed fates and families. Selyse repeated them, her voice clear and steady. Then it was done. Applause, scattered at first, swelled into a roar. The onlookers cheered, whether out of genuine celebration or because they knew how crucial this union was to the future of their houses. At the high table, Jon found himself seated beside his new wife. The sweetness of the marriage wine lingered on his tongue. It was an arbor red, potent and somewhat heady, and it seemed to fill the corners of his mind with color. Across from him, a handful of northern lords, those loyal to House Stark, exchanged guarded looks with the Stormland lords in attendance. It was a strange mingling of cultures. Winter came from the north, and storms battered the southern coast. And yet here they gathered under one roof in uneasy harmony. Selyse turned to him, the flicker of torches catching in her eyes. "You look like a man who's fought a long battle and isn't certain he's earned his peace," she said softly so that only he could hear. Jon gave a wry smile, pushing a strand of dark hair away from his brow. "Peace is a fragile thing, harder to maintain than war. Harder still when the Lannisters wait in King's Landing, no doubt plotting their next move." She tilted her head, the corners of her lips curving in a faint smile. "Then let us ensure they find the Stormlands well defended. If they try to push south or east, we will be ready, won't we?" Her voice was resolute, and for the first time, Jon saw glimpses of genuine steel behind her measured politeness. As the feast continued, minstrels played soft tunes. The clang of goblets grew louder, and the mixture of northern mead and southern wines lured the men into laughter. But beneath that laughter lay tension. Everyone knew of House Lannister's penchant for cunning maneuvers. Even now, envoys and spies likely carried word to Casterly Rock or King's Landing. No alliance or marriage could fully douse the smoldering ambitions of the Iron Throne or quell the lingering resentments from the War of the Five Kings. Night deepened. The wind outside rose in a mournful cry around the towers. One by one, the torches guttered, leaving the great hall in more shadow than light. Guests took their leave or found corners to continue drinking, spinning old battle yarns, or forging new intrigues behind closed doors. The day had been triumphant in its own way, but the real battles would be waged in the uncertain times ahead. Jon led Selyse through the corridors of Storm's End to the chamber prepared for them. The walls glistened with the seepage of perpetual damp, a hallmark of this fortress by the sea, forever battered by storms. He recalled Winterfell's drafty halls with a pang of nostalgia. Even the gloom of Castle Black had never felt as damp as these ancient corridors. In the flickering light of a lone lantern, Selyse said nothing at first. She ran her fingers along the stone as if greeting the fortress that had sheltered her family for generations. When they reached their chamber, she closed the door behind them. Ghost, silent as moonlight, chose a spot in the hallway just beyond, curling up to guard their threshold. Inside, the windows were narrow, little more than arrow slits, letting in the boom of the restless sea and the shriek of the wind. "I suppose we are both wards of a future yet unwritten," she said softly, turning to face him. "We carry our family's hopes, their prides, and maybe their curses as well." Jon nodded. "We do." He paused, taking in the solemnity of her words. "I won't pretend to know what challenges lie ahead, but I've seen enough battle to know the cost of war. If we can keep the Stormlands safe, keep both our people safe, It might be enough reason for what we've done today." Her eyes flickered with an emotion he couldn't quite name. "I hope so," she whispered. Then the moment passed, and the newlyweds began what was to be their first night together, carrying the weight of two great houses upon their shoulders. In the following days, Storm's End saw activity like it had not in years. Messengers arrived bearing tidings from the Reach, the Riverlands, and even Dorne. Some of them were well-wishers, others were spies cloaked as travelers. The lords sworn to House Baratheon, those who had not been entirely vanquished in the recent wars, came to pay homage to their lady and her new husband. They brought tidings of discontent, rumors that the Lannisters were tightening their hold on King's Landing. Whispers spoke of Cersei Lannister's precarious rule, of gold debts owed to the Iron Bank, of fleets in the Narrow Sea, and of a growing sense of restlessness among the common folk. Jon and Selyse found themselves immersed in councils and strategy sessions that stretched long into the night. Davos Seaworth, gruff yet earnest, provided invaluable insights. He had a keen nose for trouble, having navigated the treacherous politics of both Stannis' campaigns and the aftermath of the war. In the council chamber, amid maps spread across a sturdy old table, Jon learned just how battered the Stormlands truly were. Many of the local lords had lost men and resources in the War of the Five Kings. The far-flung corners of the domain struggled with bandits and lawlessness. Rebuilding strongholds, forging new alliances, and training fresh levies would take time. Time that the Lannisters might not be willing to grant. House Lannister has gold, ships, and cunning. Davos reminded them one evening, the light from a single oil lamp illuminating the salt and pepper stubble on his jaw. They'll not allow this marriage to go unanswered. If they sense the Stormlands rising against them, they might strike before we can gather our strength. Selyse, standing beside a banner pinned to the wall, traced her fingertips over the embroidered stag. "My father would have called their bluff and marched," she said, the corner of her mouth curving in faint amusement. "But I'd rather be more prudent. Let them see that we're rebuilding. Let them think we're only securing ourselves against bandits in the countryside. Let them underestimate the Baratheon name again." Jon studied the map, silent. To the north lay the Crownlands, the dominion of King's Landing. To the west, the Reach had suffered from war and would need time to recover. The roads were treacherous. He glanced at Davos and then at Selyse. "We should send a raven to my sister Sansa. She holds Winterfell, and the north has men enough to ride if we truly need them. It might be wise to let her know our intentions." Selyse nodded. "Agreed. With the North's support, or at least the threat of it, the Lannisters may pause." Davos gave a measured shrug. "Word travels swiftly. The Lannisters must already know of this marriage. They'll be gathering their wits, deciding their next step. We should do the same." In the weeks that followed, Jon's presence became a curious fixture in the Stormlands. He sparred in the courtyard with Stormlander knights, learning their methods while they eyed his northern fighting style. He joined hunts in the lush forests beyond the castle walls, where stags bolted through thick undergrowth and boars lurked near boggy streams. Selyse often rode beside him, her posture confident, her black hair braided back. Her eyes would glitter whenever a thunderhead loomed in the distance, as if she drew strength from the land's tempestuous nature. The people of the Stormlands, at first wary, began to accept Jon. Children followed him about as he walked through the bailey, curious about the white dire wolf that haunted the corridors. Farmers from the outlying villages brought small offerings, fresh eggs, cheese, even barrels of salted fish to show their hesitant goodwill. Over time, Jon endeared himself by listening to their woes, pledging new structures for trade, and showing that he was not simply a northern interloper but someone invested in their well-being. Still, a sense of tension lingered. Letters bearing the Lannister sigil began to arrive. The language was always formal, never openly threatening, but each line spoke of concern for the peace of the realm and the hope that all houses might honor their fealty to the Iron Throne. Selyse took them with a polite smile, then tossed them aside, unread after the first skim. "We know what they truly want," she said to Jon one morning after another courier had left. "They want us to bend the knee, to swear fealty, and send our men to fight for their wars, to fill their coffers with our taxes. My father and uncles fought bitterly against the crown when it served Lannister ambitions. We're in no rush to do so again." Jon could see the conflict behind her eyes. There was a risk. The Stormlands had yet to fully recover, and defiance of the throne, even one so tenuously held, could spark a confrontation that might devastate them. But the alternative was an endless subjugation to a family that had proven itself cruel and cunning. And so he stood by Selyse's side, drafting carefully worded replies that said nothing and everything all at once, promising only to keep the peace and expressing hope for mutual goodwill. It was a dance of ravens that soared back and forth between Storm's End and King's Landing, each message scrutinized by both sides for hidden meaning. When the first official envoy from King's Landing arrived, the portents were ominous. A small retinue of Lannister guards, clad in crimson cloaks, appeared at the gates. Their leader was Ser Donnell Swift, a lesser knight but reputedly loyal to the Lannisters' cause. He requested an audience with Lady Selyse and her lord husband, speaking in haughty tones about the realm's need for unity. The man's expression grew stiff when he saw the dire wolf prowling just behind Jon's shoulder. Davos Seaworth, standing off to one side in the antechamber, watched with narrowed eyes. Jon and Selyse listened to Ser Donnell's polished words. The gist was clear enough. King's Landing wished to test this alliance, to see if the Stormlands would contribute to the stability of the realm. Veiled within that phrase was an expectation of fealty and subservience. Selyse's reply was measured. Stability can be found in many ways, Ser Donnell. The Stormlands will do its part to protect the peace. If King's Landing wishes to treat with us as equals, we are open to such discussions. The envoy bristled slightly but maintained his composure. The Iron Throne seeks only what is best for all of Westeros. We trust you will remember your duties as sworn vassals. At that, Jon inclined his head, face impassive. He had learned to hide his thoughts behind a stillness gleaned from years of hardship. We remember much, he said quietly. We remember the wars, the betrayals. We also remember that our houses once stood together when Robert Baratheon rose against King Aerys. Perhaps in time we can find a path toward a shared future. The Lannister men departed soon after, leaving behind more questions than answers. No direct threat had been voiced, yet the tension was unmistakable. The Stormlands were no longer a quiet corner of the realm. Their stance had been declared. They refused to bend easily to Lannister demands, and for that they might face the Lion's Claw. Back in the council chamber, Selyse clenched her fists on the table. That was a warning. They're testing our strength. We must prepare. Davos nodded. Aye, my lady. Best not to mistake silence for acceptance. They'll come at us when we least expect it. Jon cast a glance at the map once more, at the roads leading inland toward the Crownlands. Memories of war flooded him, images of battle, the screams of men, the clashing of steel. He had hoped, naively perhaps, that forging a marriage alliance might be enough to deter another war. But the game was rarely that simple. When ravens arrived from the north carrying Sansa's words, Jon felt a flicker of relief. The Lady of Winterfell expressed her congratulations and her cautious support. A new line in the letter caught his eye: rumors of renewed hostilities across the sea, whispers of dragons returning to Westeros, though unconfirmed. The letter's final lines reminded him that the North still remembered and that if the Stormlands required aid, Sansa would do her best to rally the bannermen. But the North was vast, winter was cruel, and resources were spread thin. Help would not be immediate. Meanwhile, the Stormlands under Selyse's stewardship began to fortify. Walls were repaired, armories restocked, and outlying loyal lords were encouraged to drill their levies. Jon himself led training exercises, forging a sense of camaraderie among northern men who had followed him south and the Stormlanders who viewed him initially with caution. They practiced archery in the drizzle, swords in the muddy yard, and cavalry tactics on the rolling fields where gusts of wind whipped the tall grasses. In those moments, Jon felt more at ease than in council chambers. The weight of politics receded, replaced by the clarity of steel in hand. At night, in their private chambers, he and Selyse would speak in low tones, discussing their people's hopes, fears, and the possibility that war might be inevitable. They had grown closer in those first months of marriage, learning each other's temperaments, discovering commonalities, and forging a subtle bond. Neither had expected to find genuine companionship in an alliance that had been arranged for political reasons. Yet a sense of mutual respect and a shared desire to see their lands safe began to weave them together. On a chilly morning following a night of relentless rain, a raven arrived bearing a new missive. King's Landing summoned them to appear before the Iron Throne to declare their loyalty once and for all. Failure to do so would be seen as an act of rebellion. The parchment was signed by the Queen Regent, Cersei Lannister's name scrawled with regal flourish. In the Great Hall of Storm's End, lords and advisors gathered to discuss the summons. Opinions ranged from outright refusal to cautious compliance. Some argued that ignoring the command would bring immediate Lannister retaliation. Others believed going to King's Landing would be walking into a lion's den with no guarantee of safe return. Selyse sat at the head of the table, her face as unreadable as any statue carved in stone. Jon stood beside her, arms folded, listening. At length, she leaned forward, hands clasped. If we refuse, we give them the excuse they need to brand us traitors. They'll claim we defy the crown openly. That might rally the other houses to their side. If we go, we risk being taken hostage or worse. Serald Caron, an older knight from Nightsong, scratched at his beard. We could demand safe passage, some sort of formal guarantee. Paper guarantees mean little to the Lannisters, Davos said softly. Remember how they handled the Red Wedding. Promises and words did not stop betrayal. Silence settled. Jon broke it by stepping forward. We have to be strategic. If we don't appear, we lose the chance to control the narrative. If we do appear, we might be able to gauge the situation in King's Landing, see what they have planned. A show of strength might dissuade them. But we can't go unprepared. Selyse exchanged a glance with him. We'll attend, but we'll bring our best knights, and we'll demand recognition of our rights as the rulers of the Stormlands. If they try to corner us, we'll be ready. No one could deny the boldness of her plan. Fear lingered like a specter in the corners of that hall, but the idea of openly defying a royal decree felt equally perilous. The alliance of the Stormlands and the North had to be showcased, or else their enemies would pick them apart with rumor and cunning. Preparations for the journey began. A retinue was formed, knights of proven loyalty, a handful of northern soldiers, Davos Seaworth, and a few prominent Stormlander lords. Selyse would ride at the head with Jon at her side. Ghost would, of course, join them, a silent reminder of the North's presence. They set out under steely skies, the wind snapping their banners, stag and dire wolf side by side. Townsfolk watched them depart, some cheering for their lady and her northern husband, others offering silent prayers that this venture would not end in bloodshed. The roads toward the Crownlands were muddy with late-season rains. Traveling was slow and the nights were cold when they made camp along the way. Scouts reported minimal movement on the roads, though they occasionally spotted Lannister men in small groups. None approached them openly, but the sense of being watched persisted. Even the horses snorted restlessly at night, as if sensing an undercurrent of unease. On the 7th day of travel, King's Landing appeared on the horizon, the Red Keep's towers rising above the city's sprawling expanse. Smoke drifted from 1,000 chimneys, mingling with the salt air off Blackwater Bay. The gold of the lion banners fluttered on the walls, and a cadre of gold-cloaked guards stood at the gates, already informed of the Baratheon party's impending arrival. As they entered the city, they found the streets thick with onlookers. Some curious, some hostile, others indifferent. The capital had always been a crucible of power, and that power was now poised to test them. When the procession wound its way to the Red Keep, they were met by a small welcoming party. The man at its head introduced himself as Qyburn, the Queen's hand, bearing a polite but distant smile. Welcome to King's Landing. Her Grace, the Queen Regent, awaits your presence in the throne room. Rooms have been prepared for you. Jon exchanged a quick look with Selyse. She gave a barely perceptible nod. They dismounted in the courtyard, leaving their horses and the rest of their entourage to be seen to by stable hands and servants. Their core group advanced into the keep. The torches along the walls glowed dimly, and the corridors were hushed except for the echo of boot steps on stone. They passed through ornate doors into the throne room, a vast space dominated by the Iron Throne itself, a grotesque assembly of swords taken from conquered enemies, fused by dragonfire long ago. Cersei Lannister sat upon that throne, her golden hair woven into an elaborate style. Her gown, a deep crimson embroidered with gold lions, caught the torchlight in fiery glints. Her bearing was rigid, her pale green eyes fixed upon the newcomers. To her right stood a figure in white armor, the Lord Commander of the Kingsguard, face obscured behind an emotionless helm. At Cersei's left stood Jaime Lannister, dressed in a black doublet, the stump of his missing hand lightly concealed by a golden covering. A scattering of courtiers and lords whispered among themselves in the gallery. The Baratheon Stark party approached the throne, halting at a respectful distance. Silence stretched. Jon could sense the tension in the air, thick as the summer heat that lingered within these walls. Finally, Cersei spoke, her voice carrying a cool authority. You have come as summoned. I trust your journey was uneventful. Selyse inclined her head, her posture unwavering. "We came as requested, your grace. We stand ready to discuss the matters of the realm." Cersei's lips curved into a faint, mirthless smile. "Indeed, the matters of the realm are many, and your name has been spoken in council more than once, Lady Baratheon. The Stormlands hold a proud history of loyalty, yet some question whether this alliance with the North signals a different intention." Jon felt her gaze sweep over him. He bowed with a measured politeness. "The Stormlands and the North seek only the safety of our people, your grace. We have no desire for another war. We aim to ensure the crown respects our lands and honors the memory of those who died in previous conflicts." Cersei tilted her head. "Memories can be treacherous things, Lord Snow. You've known betrayal, as have we all. But the Iron Throne cannot simply abide separate powers swelling in the corners of the realm. We must have assurances." Selyse's voice cut through the hush. "What sort of assurances, your grace?" "The sort that clarify your loyalty," Cersei said, each word edged with steel. "Swear your fealty before the court. Acknowledge the Iron Throne as your rightful liege. Pay the taxes owed, send a pledge of men for the crown's future needs, and cease any discussions that suggest rebellion. In exchange, the crown will recognize your marriage and your right to oversee the Stormlands in Baratheon name." A small, cold knot of anger formed in Jon's gut as he listened to her demands. They were couched in the formal language of the court, but the subtext was glaring: kneel or be branded traitors. He glanced at Selyse, who kept her features schooled. "If the Stormlands are to maintain their autonomy, we cannot simply bend the knee and forfeit all control," she replied. "Our people are rebuilding. We will not be squeezed dry by excessive taxes, nor can we offer men we do not have. If the Lannisters would see the Stormlands flourish as part of a peaceful realm, they might work with us rather than dictate from a distance." A flicker of amusement passed over Cersei's face, though it held no warmth. "Work with you? The Lannisters are the crown now. We do not work with vassals. We command and vassals obey." Tension sparked in the air. Jon saw Jaime Lannister's gaze flick toward him, assessing. The courtiers seemed to collectively hold their breath. Selyse's voice, when it came, was measured yet firm. "It seems we have little to discuss, then, if your mind is made up, your grace." Cersei's eyes flashed. "Is that defiance I hear?" Jon stepped forward and half the Kingsguard tensed. He kept his voice calm. "We want peace, but not at the cost of being no better than thralls. The Stormlands are Baratheon lands. I stand beside my wife in this. We are not rebels, but we will not simply become puppets of the throne." For a moment, Cersei said nothing. Then she rose from the Iron Throne, stepping down carefully. The hall was so quiet Jon could hear the rustle of her skirts. When she reached them, the gold of her gown and the green flecks in her eyes shone in the torchlight. "I see that the wolf has grown claws and the stag stands beside him. Perhaps you think this alliance makes you untouchable." Jon held her gaze. "Nothing is untouchable, your grace, as we've all learned through war. We only ask for fairness." She pursed her lips, then turned sharply and moved back toward the throne. "You will remain as guests in the Red Keep for a time. We shall see if a fair arrangement can be made. But mark me well, both of you, there is no outcome that will permit the Stormlands to act as an independent kingdom. The crown's authority extends to every corner of Westeros. Do not test my patience." Selyse and Jon had no choice but to bow, feigning courtesy. The court session ended with an air of unsettled tension. Servants led them to their assigned quarters, tastefully appointed rooms in one of the tower wings. The windows offered a broad view of Blackwater Bay dotted with ships. The thought that they were effectively under the watchful eye of the Lannisters made the spacious rooms feel like a gilded cage. That night, the courtiers feigned civility, hosting a banquet in the Great Hall. Cersei sat at the head of the table, Jaime beside her, Qyburn to her other side. Lords and ladies from across the Crownlands were in attendance, as were a few from the Reach. The Stormland retinue was placed conspicuously close to the royal dais, under constant scrutiny. Musicians played courtly tunes, servants circulated with wine and ale, and the scent of roasted pheasant mixed with the underlying tension that permeated every hushed conversation. Jon sipped sparingly from his goblet, mindful that in King's Landing, wine could be as dangerous as daggers. He could feel eyes upon him whenever he so much as spoke with Selyse. Across the table, Davos wore a polite but guarded expression, nodding occasionally when the conversation demanded, but saying little. Ser Eldon Caron made an effort to appear at ease, laughing a bit too loudly at the jests of a Crownlands lord, possibly in an attempt to smooth tensions. Late in the evening, after the feast had waned and the music became softer, Cersei rose and excused herself, taking her closest advisors with her. The mood in the great hall shifted subtly once she was gone. A handful of guests drifted toward Jon and Selyse, offering forced smiles. They tested the waters with bland politeness, questioning them about the Stormlands and the North. Some were no doubt fishing for gossip or clues about their intentions. Jon offered courteous answers, always mindful to reveal little. When at last the evening ended, they made their way to their chambers. As the door shut behind them, Jon let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. Selyse unpinned her hair, shaking it free. She looked tired, her eyes shadowed. "This place is a viper's nest," she said in a low voice. "I see why my family always preferred Storm's End." Jon agreed. The Red Keep's walls felt like they were closing in, and every corridor seemed lined with watchers. "We need to be cautious. Cersei might keep us here for weeks, wearing us down until we either submit or make a misstep." Selyse sank onto a cushioned chair by the window. The flicker of torchlight from outside played across her features, revealing the strain of the day. "We can't yield, Jon. If we do, the Stormlands will be lost to the Lannisters' whims." He approached her, resting a hand on her shoulder. "We won't. But we must pick our moment, and we must be ready." Their days in King's Landing stretched on. The next morning, Selyse and Jon were summoned to a small council meeting, only to find themselves stonewalled by Qyburn and a handful of sycophants who insisted on hashing out the minutiae of taxes and harbor fees. Jaime Lannister observed from a distance, speaking little but occasionally interjecting with pragmatic remarks. Cersei herself made only brief appearances, always with an air of imperious authority. She spoke vaguely of upcoming matters of the realm, a threat hidden in her words. Meanwhile, letters came from the Stormlands, warning of small Lannister parties spotted near certain roads and holdings. No open aggression, merely patrols or travelers, but the implication was clear: the Lannisters were sizing up their territory in their absence. Jon and Selyse began to worry that if they tarried too long, a more direct move might be made against Storm's End. The nights brought little respite. Court events, feasts, and gatherings served only to wear them down. Gossip swirled everywhere, whispers of new alliances, rumors of a Targaryen claimant across the sea. Some said a dragon had been seen flying over the narrow sea, though no one could confirm. Jon's mind spun with possibilities. Was the world truly on the brink of yet another upheaval? He thought of the White Walkers, of all the battles he'd fought. The notion that new conflicts might flare across Westeros left him feeling like a man standing on a fault line, waiting for the quake. Selyse began to push for a formal audience with Cersei, demanding a clear resolution. The Queen Regent evaded, citing pressing matters of state. Instead, Qyburn drew them into meeting after meeting, always focusing on trifling issues, never addressing the core question of the Stormlands' autonomy and fealty. It was a deliberate strategy, wearing them down, forcing them to remain in King's Landing until frustration grew or circumstances compelled submission. Davos, ever intuitive, pulled Jon aside one afternoon in a deserted corridor. "We're spinning our wheels here, lad. If we stay much longer, we risk losing Storm's End. At the very least, the Lannisters will have time to fortify their position. We have to do something." Jon's jaw tightened. "I know. But if we leave without an agreement, Cersei will brand us rebels. She'll say we refuse to acknowledge the crown's authority." Davos nodded grimly. "There's no easy choice. But sometimes there's wisdom in acting first. If she's preparing a move on the Stormlands, you might want to be there to meet it." That night, Jon and Selyse deliberated over every angle, every risk. Frustration coursed through them like the Stormlander thunder. Ultimately, they decided they would attempt one final direct approach to Cersei, force her hand in a manner of speaking. If she remained intransigent, they would depart under the pretense of urgent matters at Storm's End and let the pieces fall where they may. Thus, they requested a private audience with the Queen Regent. Surprisingly, it was granted. The next morning, they found themselves ushered into Cersei's Solar, a spacious room with tall windows overlooking the city's rooftops. The light revealed every line on her face, each one telling a story of ambition, loss, and unrelenting will. She received them with a faintly cordial smile that did not reach her eyes. "Lord Snow, Lady Baratheon, I trust you found King's Landing hospitable?" Selyse, dressed in a simple gown of dark green, spoke first. "Your Grace, we have attended your feasts, sat in your council sessions, and listened. Now, we must have clarity. The Stormlands will not be toyed with indefinitely." Cersei's brow arched. "Toyed with? I offer you the chance to reaffirm your loyalty to the crown in a manner that ensures lasting peace. It is you who have delayed matters, Lady Baratheon. by making demands the crown finds impertinent. Jon's voice remained steady. We have delayed nothing. We've shown good faith by coming here. But if you mean to hold the Stormlands as hostages to your will, that's not peace, it's subjugation. Cersei rose from her chair, gaze narrowing. Subjugation? Westeros has one ruler, and it is not you, Jon Snow. Perhaps you harbor delusions after your time as king in the north. But those days are gone. You knelt once before Daenerys Targaryen, did you not? She let the question hang, a cruel glimmer in her eyes. Where is she now? Where are those dragons you once hoped would free us all? Jon's blood went cold at the mention of Daenerys. He reined in the memories. Daenerys is gone, he said quietly. That changes nothing about our desire for peace and fairness. If the crown cannot offer that, then we have no more reason to stay. Cersei inhaled sharply. You dare threaten me in my own city? Selyse stood straighter. There is no threat, Your Grace. Simply a statement of fact. We have done our duty by attending your summons. Now we must return home. If the Iron Throne wishes to make an enemy of the Stormlands, that will be your doing, not ours. Anger contorted Cersei's features for a moment. Then she schooled them into a mask of cold composure. Very well, she said, her voice clipped. Return to Storm's End. But know this. Should you refuse the crown's requests, you will face the consequences. Your house rose to prominence by seizing the throne once, but that age is done. The Lannisters are the realm's rightful guardians now. Cross us again, and not even your stone walls will save you. Jon and Selyse exchanged a weighted glance. There was nothing more to be gained. They left the solar with measured steps, hearts pounding. Outside, Davos awaited them, concern etched into his weathered face. That didn't sound promising, he murmured. It wasn't, Jon replied. We leave for Storm's End at first light. We'll be ready for whatever Cersei sends our way. Their departure was swift. The tension in King's Landing was palpable, as if a single spark could set the city ablaze. They rode out through the Iron Gate with their retinue, passing throngs of commoners, gold cloaks, and watchful eyes. Once beyond the city's outskirts, Jon felt a measure of relief. The open road, even muddy and rutted, was preferable to the labyrinth of palace intrigue. Ghost loped alongside them, the direwolf's ears alert, picking up on the traveler's restless energy. The first days of the journey passed uneventfully, but a storm began to gather overhead, dark clouds blotting out the sun. The Stormlands lived up to their name. Sheets of rain pummeled the company, lightning cracked the sky, and thunder shook the ground. Despite the deluge, Jon felt oddly at home. He had grown used to the cold and snow of the north, but storms had a cleansing quality, a fierce honesty he appreciated. Selyse, for her part, rode with unwavering determination, water streaming from her cloak. When Storm's End finally rose before them, a familiar silhouette of broad walls and stout towers, it was like sighting a beacon of hope. The gates groaned open, and the company filed in, drenched and exhausted. Courtiers and servants came to greet them, relief mingling with anxiety. Davos set about immediately conferring with the fortress's stewards, passing along orders to bolster defenses, check stores of food, and ensure patrols were vigilant on every road. Jon and Selyse, once they had shed their sodden cloaks, received a barrage of reports from the local lords. The news was sobering. Lannister men were indeed gathering at various points along the border, claiming to be reinforcing Crownland's security. Ships bearing the royal crest had been sighted along the coastline, potentially scouting for weaknesses. The small folk murmured about renewed war, remembering the devastation of previous conflicts. A war council convened in Storm's End's largest chamber, no longer the Great Hall, but a more private strategy room with thick walls that muffled the howling wind. Around a heavy oak table stood Jon, Selyse, Davos, Ser Eldon Caron, and a cluster of Stormlander knights and lords. Tension coiled in every face. Jon opened the meeting. The Lannisters have made their intentions clear. They will not tolerate what they perceive as defiance. We must assume they plan an invasion or at least a punitive campaign. We're outnumbered, Ser Eldon said bluntly. House Lannister can field a larger army. The gold of Casterly Rock funds them. And with King's Landing under their control, they can bring other crown-loyal houses to bear. Selyse looked at a map spread out on the table. We can fortify Storm's End, rally our bannermen. The Stormlands might stand a siege, but we cannot wage a long, costly war without allies. She lifted her gaze to Jon. We need the North, and perhaps others. Jon nodded, remembering Sansa's letter. We'll send ravens. The North will stand with us, though their forces are many leagues away. It'll take time for them to march south. We could also reach out to what remains of the Tyrell banners in the Reach, though that region suffered heavily in the war. Davos leaned over the map. Dorne might hold resentment against the Lannisters for what was done to the Martells. But Dorne has been quiet, licking its wounds. It's a gamble to rely on them. Silence settled, heavy with the specter of the choices before them. They could hunker down and try to withstand a siege, hoping allies would arrive in time, or they could attempt to strike preemptively in some way, disrupt the Lannister approach before it reached their gates. But a preemptive strike carried huge risks and could be spun as outright rebellion against the crown. Days bled into weeks as Storm's End prepared for the worst. The clang of hammers rang through the courtyard as repairs and enhancements were made to the walls. Archers drilled on the ramparts in the pouring rain. Smiths worked day and night forging swords, arrows, and spears. Food stores were bolstered, and outlying villagers were encouraged to bring their flocks behind safer walls if the call went out. Ravens flew north, east, and west, carrying missives pleading for aid or at least understanding. Jon oversaw much of this, remembering his days at the Wall when winter threatened. The mindless terrors of the White Walkers had once been his greatest fear. Now the threat was all too human and cunning. Selyse took counsel with her bannermen, ensuring each held strong to the Baratheon cause. The occasional sign of hesitation or doubt was met with a pointed reminder that if the Lannisters won, the Stormlands would once again be subjugated, stripped of dignity, and left to rot. One restless afternoon, a scout galloped into the courtyard, half frozen and drenched, demanding an audience. Jon, Selyse, and Davos met him in the stable yard as the man slid from his horse, panting, water streaming from his cloak. "What news?" Jon demanded, helping steady the man. "Lannister troops?" gasped the scout, pushing wet hair from his eyes. "They're massing near the Wendwater, within striking distance of the Stormlands border. I saw banners. Red and gold. Infantry, cavalry, siege weapons. They're not just small patrols anymore." A hush fell, broken only by the drumming of rain on the cobblestones. The final confirmation had arrived, war was looming, and it was only a matter of time before the first blow fell. They rushed to the council room, the scout repeating his observations in greater detail, the numbers, the direction of travel, the presence of engineers who might be building or moving siege engines. The Lannisters were assembling an army large enough to overrun smaller strongholds. They might attempt a swift campaign to isolate Storm's End. "We should gather our forces at Bronzegate," Ser Eldon said, his brow furrowed. "Meet them before they push deeper into our territory." Davos grimaced. "We could, but if they're larger in number, we risk being flanked. Storm's End is an excellent defensive position, but we can't let them just ravage the countryside either." Jon stared at the map, his thoughts churning. "If the North were closer, we could catch the Lannisters in a pincer. But my sister won't be able to send help soon enough to prevent the initial strike." Selyse laid a hand on Jon's arm. "We may have to fight a delaying action, keep them at bay until our allies can arrive. Storm's End has withstood long sieges before. If we can hold out, we might force the Lannisters into a stalemate." It became clear that no perfect solution existed. Every option carried heavy risks. Ultimately, the decision was made to position a strong defensive force at key border fortresses, harass the Lannister columns if they advanced, and then fall back toward Storm's End if necessary, forcing a siege. Envoys were dispatched once again, imploring the North and any sympathetic houses in the Reach or Dorne to hasten their relief. As the Stormlander forces marched out under gray skies, Jon and Selyse stood atop the battlements, watching them depart. Rows of men bearing the stag banner, swords glinting dully in the muted light, trudged along muddy roads. War horns sounded their low, mournful notes. The wind whipped Selyse's cloak behind her. She clenched the stone crenellation, her knuckles white. Jon glanced at her. "We'll hold one way or another. The Stormlands are strong, just like the North." She nodded, but a flicker of fear danced behind her blue eyes. "I wish it didn't have to come to this. But the Lannisters leave us no choice." Jon understood that sentiment all too well. He had once watched the free folk retreat from an unstoppable foe, had once tried to broker peace to prevent senseless slaughter. Yet men's hearts were often prideful and cruel. Now here he stood, forging another stand against a different enemy. The name changed, but the cycle of war repeated. Soon, reports trickled in of skirmishes along the border. Stormlander scouts led small raids, burning bridges or supply wagons, trying to slow the Lannister advance. The Lannisters responded with brutal efficiency, capturing and executing several scouts, sending their heads back on pikes as a warning. Fear spread among villagers, who fled toward the safety of Storm's End or deeper into the forest. Days became a blur of logistical planning, messenger arrivals, and tense council sessions. At night, Jon and Selyse caught precious moments of sleep, haunted by the knowledge that each dawn might bring new horrors. Ghost prowled the corridors restlessly, as though he too sensed the looming battle. Finally, the Lannisters made their move. An army of thousands pressed across the border under the command of a seasoned general loyal to Cersei. Word reached Storm's End that the enemy had taken a smaller castle, Crow's Nest, after minimal resistance. The defenders had been outnumbered 10-1. Some had managed to escape and ride for Storm's End, battered and demoralized. "They're bearing down on Bronzegate next," one wounded soldier gasped, barely able to stand. "Ser Eldon and our men are there, but I don't know if they can hold." In a rush, Jon and Davos organized reinforcements to be sent to Bronzegate, but the roads were treacherous, riddled with Lannister outriders. The Stormlanders found themselves fighting a fierce delaying action, trying to keep the Lannisters entangled in smaller engagements so they couldn't muster their full strength. Casualties mounted on both sides, and as the conflict escalated, the once quiet countryside filled with smoke from burning hamlets. Inside Storm's End, the tension was suffocating. Refugees crowded the bailey, clamoring for shelter. Provisions were stretched. Selyse and her ladies oversaw the distribution of rations, ensuring that the old and young were fed. Warriors patrolled the walls. Every distant horn or clang of metal brought hearts to a hammering pace. News came that Bronzegate had fallen after a bloody siege. Ser Eldon Cairn was killed in the fighting, and the survivors retreated toward Storm's End. The Lannisters were methodically pushing forward, and while they had taken losses, their overall momentum seemed unstoppable. "They'll arrive here within the fortnight," Davos told Jon and Selyse one night, after a grim reading of the scouts' latest reports. "Then the real siege begins." Jon's face hardened. "We make them pay for every step. Storm's End has stood through worse. Robert once sat here through a siege that nearly starved everyone. Stannis broke that siege. We'll do the same if it comes to that." Selyse managed a tight, determined smile. "The stag stands proud." She nodded toward the direwolf at Jon's side. "And the wolf stands with it." So it was that Storm's End prepared for the decisive confrontation. The ramparts were manned day and night. Boiling oil and pitch were readied. Stores were rationed carefully to ensure they could outlast a prolonged siege. Archers lined the walls, flanked by crossbowmen and spear throwers. The courtyard was transformed into a makeshift hospital, cots lined up for the wounded who trickled in from the front lines. Jon found moments to walk along the battlements, Ghost padding beside him, peering out at the storm-lashed horizon. He remembered the vastness of the north, the haunted emptiness of the wall. This was different. There was no vast emptiness here, only the expectation of an enemy at their gates. Sometimes he glanced at the sea, wondering if ships might come bearing allies, but the water remained gray and unbroken, save for the white-capped waves. Finally, the call went up. Lannister scouts had been spotted, and their main host was close behind. The Stormlander horns sounded in response, echoing across the cliffside. Men rushed to their stations. The skies opened in a furious downpour, thunder rolling, lightning cracking in jagged forks overhead. The very heavens seemed to mirror the clash of wills below. The Lannister army appeared on a slope overlooking the fortress, a mass of crimson cloaks and banners. Siege towers, catapults, and rows of infantry stretched as far as the eye could see. Even through the storm's haze, their war horns brayed ominously. The stage was set. Selyse stood atop the walls with Jon and Davos cloaked in oilskin to repel the worst of the rain. She gazed out at the sea of Lannister soldiers. Her jaw was set. "They want us to see their numbers, to frighten us into surrender." Jon's eyes flickered with grim resolve. They'll see how the Stormlands greet uninvited guests. A volley of flaming arrows arced through the darkened sky, extinguished almost immediately by the torrential downpour, plunking uselessly into the wet earth below. The Lannisters tried adjusting their strategy, launching stones from catapults that crashed against Storm's End's thick curtain walls. Rubble and dust sprayed, but the old fortress held firm. The defenders answered with their own barrage, launching heavy stones that smashed into siege towers. Lannister screams rippled through the chaos. Then came the relentless pounding at the main gate. Battering rams rolled forward, men huddled beneath thick wooden coverings to shield themselves from arrows. The Stormlanders rained pitch and hot oil upon them, igniting bursts of flame that, despite the rain, licked at the siege apparatus. The smell of burning wood and flesh mingled with the reek of damp mud. 4 hours it continued, a cacophony of thunder, war cries, and clashing steel as the Lannisters pressed every angle. The outer defenses around Storm's End fell back in controlled retreats, forcing the attackers to funnel into kill zones near the fortress walls. Smoke, steam, and the unending roar of the storm gave the battle an otherworldly quality, as if the land itself was raging against invasion. Jon led a contingent of archers along the ramparts, ensuring they targeted the Lannister officers and engineers. Ghost, far from idle, prowled the battlements. Whenever a breach threatened, the direwolf's presence rallied the defenders. Selyse moved from tower to tower, shouting encouragement, her hair slicked to her skin. She reminded them of the Baratheon words, hammered by the wind, "Ours is the fury." By nightfall, the Lannisters had failed to breach the walls, but the cost was high on both sides. The moat filled with bodies and the muddy ground churned with blood. The storm gave no mercy, flashes of lightning illuminating the ghastly battlefield. The defenders took stock, tending to the wounded. Jon's arms trembled from loosing arrow after arrow, yet he refused to rest until the walls were secure. Morning revealed the grim persistence of the Lannisters. They were preparing for a full siege. Siege engines were repositioned, wooden stakes driven into the ground to ward off sorties. Tents sprang up like a foul red carpet across the landscape. The fortress was encircled, and so began a siege that tested every ounce of resolve. The Lannisters attempted to starve Storm's End, but the fortress had been provisioned well. Days turned into weeks. The rains came and went, the storms battered the coast. Occasionally, the Lannisters tried small assaults, sapping at the walls or launching incendiaries, but Storm's End withstood them. Inside, though, the situation grew dire. Food supplies dwindled more quickly than hoped, strained by the influx of refugees. Clean water was rationed. Sickness took root in the cramped conditions. Even so, Selyse and Jon refused any suggestion of surrender. Ravens continued to fly north, carrying pleas for aid. Each day, the defenders wondered if help was coming or if they would be left to the slow strangulation. Selyse stood in the courtyard one evening, exhausted but resolute as she supervised the distribution of rations to the wounded. Jon found her there, swallowing his own fatigue, offering what comfort he could. "Word from our last Raven said the North is mustering," he told her quietly. "They've sent men, but they're still weeks away." She nodded, eyes flickering with determination. Storm's End held out once before against a siege that lasted months. "We can do it again. We must." The Lannisters will grow restless, and the longer they're out there in this weather, the more their supplies suffer. Jon managed a faint smile, recalling old stories of the siege broken by Davos and his onions so many years ago. Could fate repeat itself in a similar stroke of luck? He didn't know, but he held tight to hope. When the dawn broke the next day, horns sounded from the Lannister lines. Defenders scrambled to the battlements, fearing another assault. Instead, they saw dust plumes on the horizon behind the Lannister camps. Another army approached. For a tense moment, it seemed reinforcements for the enemy had arrived, sealing Storm's End's fate. But as the dust settled, new banners were visible, wolves of the north and scattered flags from the Riverlands. Houses that had ties to the Starks. The relief force, marching under the leadership of one of Sansa's generals, had finally arrived. They had traveled relentlessly, forging alliances with the Tully remnants along the way. And now they bore down upon the Lannisters from the rear, threatening to trap them between the fortress and a new foe. Inside Storm's End, cheers erupted. Selyse gripped Jon's arm, her eyes shining. "They came," she gasped, as if scarcely believing. The North came. Outside, chaos engulfed the Lannister lines. Forced to shift their entire formation, they scrambled to face the northern host. The siege, so carefully prepared, crumbled into a desperate, pitched battle. Seizing the moment, Storm's End's gates opened, and Jon led a sortie of knights and soldiers to strike the Lannisters from the front. Amid rolling thunder and swirling dust, the Lannisters were caught in a vice. The clash was brutal. Steel rang against steel, where cries mingled with screams. In the thick of it, Jon fought like a man possessed, cutting through enemy lines, rallying Stormlander knights. Ghost lunged at foes who tried to flank him. Selyse, riding a swift mare, led her own squadron, brandishing a Baratheon-forged sword. Davos directed archers from the battlements, loosing volleys into the exposed Lannister ranks. The northern army slammed into the enemy's rear. The Riverlands cavalry swept in from the flanks. Surrounded, disorganized, and battered by weeks of storms, the Lannister force began to falter. Their general tried to rally them, but the weight of two armies bore down. One by one, the Lannister banners fell, and with them, the morale of their troops. By dusk, the field was littered with red-cloaked bodies, shattered weapons, and torn standards. Survivors fled in disarray. The storm clouds parted, revealing a wan sunlight streaking across the battlefield. Among the carnage, Jon and Selyse found each other, blood-splattered and weary, but alive. Ghost stood close, muzzle stained from the fight. In the distance, the northern banners stood tall, flapping in the stiff wind. A hush fell as the reality of their victory set in. Storm's End had not only survived the siege but broken it, thanks to the timely arrival of northern allies. Soldiers and knights cheered wearily, some collapsing to their knees in exhaustion, others embracing comrades they thought lost. It was a costly victory, but a victory nonetheless, one that would echo through the realm. In the aftermath, Jon and Selyse convened a council with the northern commanders, expressing profound gratitude. A sense of camaraderie filled the halls of Storm's End as men from the north and the Stormlands shared food and stories, the warmth of unity washing away some of the trauma. Letters were dispatched to King's Landing, informing Cersei Lannister that her siege had failed, that the Stormlands stood resolute, and that any further aggression would meet the combined might of the North and their allies. For a brief moment, the promise of peace returned. In the hush after the storm, Storm's End became a beacon of resistance to Lannister overreach. Battered though they were, they had shown the crown that they could not be so easily subdued. Jon stood on the parapets once more, gazing out at a sea now calmer, though still rolling with faint whitecaps. Selyse joined him, and together they reflected on the trials they had endured. He turned to her, a quiet sincerity in his eyes. Our marriage was meant to be a political alliance, but I see now it's become something more. We are bound not just by duty, but by shared struggle and hope. She reached for his hand, calloused from sword work. Yes, we stood against the lion, and we stand together still. He squeezed her hand. The horizon lay open before them, uncertain but full of possibility. The Lannisters were wounded and would think twice before launching another assault. The North had proven its willingness to aid the Stormlands. There was talk of forging an even broader alliance with those who remembered old grudges against the Lannisters' ruthless reign. And somewhere beyond, the rumors of distant threats still loomed, hints of old magic and whispered claims on thrones. But for now, in this moment, Storm's End stood defiant and united, a testament to the power of a single choice, Jon Snow marrying a Baratheon princess. Below, in the courtyard, Ghost prowled among the survivors, sniffing at wounded men with quiet concern as if acknowledging his part in the victory. Soldiers lifted their eyes to watch the pair on the battlements, some bowing, some simply gazing in wonder. Word would spread of the stand of the day the North and the Stormlands turned the tide. Tales would be told in taverns of Jon Snow, the one-time bastard of Winterfell, and Selyse Baratheon, the unyielding lady of Storm's End, forging a union that defied a lion's roar. It was not the end of conflict in Westeros. War seldom ended cleanly. But in that dawning quiet, the realm saw a different path, one forged by unity rather than submission, by respect rather than subjugation. If the Lannisters sought to press their claim again, they would face not merely two allied houses but the unbreakable will that bound them. And so, beneath the storm-lashed skies and the whispering echoes of crows overhead, a new chapter began for the Stormlands, the North, and all those who dreamed of a better future despite the swirling chaos of the times. Jon stood atop the walls of Storm's End in the aftermath of the siege, looking out over the battleground where so many had fought and fallen. A brittle wind swept inland from Shipbreaker Bay, carrying the acrid scent of burned wood, damp earth, and blood. Clouds still loomed overhead, tinted a subdued gray that hinted more storms might soon follow. Yet for the moment, the rains had paused, granting a fleeting stillness in which the survivors could reckon with what had passed. In the courtyard below, men and women moved with weary purpose, gathering the wounded, salvaging what they could from the skirmish. The victorious roar that had echoed off the battlements the day before had quieted into a subdued relief. They had repelled the Lannisters barely and only with help from the North. Still, that victory shone with a defiant light, and rumors of the stand at Storm's End would travel fast. Across the realm, folk would speak of how Jon Snow and Lady Selyse Baratheon, backed by loyal Stormlanders and a timely arrival of northern allies, had broken the Lion's Siege. Some might spin it into tales as grand as the ones that had once celebrated Robert's rebellion. A ragged gull cried overhead, and Ghost padded along the walkway beside Jon, ears pricked. The direwolf's white fur was matted with mud and flecks of dried blood, but his gait was as silent as ever. He paused to look up at Jon, his red eyes reflecting the solemn hush that had fallen across the fortress. Jon reached down to scratch him behind the ear. He could still feel the pulse of the battle in his veins, a surge of tension that refused to subside. To his left, a door groaned open and Selyse emerged, her cloak fluttering. Her dark hair was braided into a tight, practical coronet at the back of her head, and she wore a sword belted at her hip. Despite her fatigue, there was a determined tilt to her chin that reminded Jon of the spirit that had carried them through the siege. She joined him at the rampart, resting both hands on the cold stone. In the pale light, her eyes looked sharper than ever, blue as a lightning strike in the midst of a storm. "Any movement from the Lannisters?" she asked, gazing out at the scorched fields where the wreckage of siege engines still lay scattered. "None," Jon answered. "The survivors who didn't flee are now captives in our dungeons or lying in the infirmary among our own wounded. We've questioned a few. Most were common soldiers. Not much knowledge beyond their orders to claim the Stormlands in the name of the crown." Her mouth tightened. "They didn't expect the North to arrive when it did." "They didn't," Jon agreed. "And that might force them to reconsider their next move. Even the Lannisters know it's unwise to assault a fortress that can call on help from hundreds of leagues away." Selyse exhaled, her breath trailing in the chill air. "Still, I doubt this is over. Cersei doesn't forgive easily or at all." He nodded. "Which is why we should use this time to gather strength. Storm's End survived the siege, but there's damage to repair, weapons to forge, new levies to train. And we need to form stronger bonds with the North. My sister Sansa sent her men, but that doesn't mean we're invulnerable." She studied the battered field, her expression caught between resolve and weariness. "We'll rebuild. The Stormlands are no strangers to adversity." They stood a while longer, watching the slow churn of activity. The wind fluttered through the half-torn Baratheon banners overhead. Down below, a group of Stormlander knights trudged past, accompanied by northern soldiers in cloaks of gray and white. Some gave respectful nods when they recognized Jon or glimpsed the dire wolf on the parapet. Others paused to bow to Lady Selyse. The alliance between these two regions had been forged first in a marriage ceremony and then tempered in the crucible of battle. Now it felt more real than ever before. Eventually, Jon and Selyse made their way down from the walls, passing the courtyard where men were stacking broken Lannister shields, the Golden Lion device scratched and defaced. It was a stark reminder that though they'd won this battle, the war between House Baratheon and House Lannister might still rage on. Yet for that day, at least, Storm's End stood unbowed. In the great hall, cleared of rubble but still bearing dark streaks of soot near the hearth, a cluster of lords and knights had gathered around Davos Seaworth. He was stooped over a makeshift table, studying parchments and letters that had arrived by Raven over the last few days. His face was etched with concern, but it eased a fraction when he saw Jon and Selyse enter. "My lord, my lady," Davos greeted them, straightening with a soft groan. "The healers are tending to the last wave of wounded. We lost many good men, but the Stormlands keep their pride." Selyse touched his arm. "Your service is invaluable, Ser Davos. I don't know how we could have managed without your counsel." Davos waved away the praise. "I only do what needs doing. If there's any thanks to be offered, it's to the men and women who bled for us out on those walls." Jon stepped forward, resting a hand on the table. He saw the edges of torn letters, battle reports, lists of casualties. "What's the latest news?" Davos cleared his throat. "The Lannister forces that broke have retreated west, toward the Windwater or back to King's Landing. Our scouts aren't fully certain. They left behind a fair number of wounded and some materials we might salvage. We also have word from our northern allies' commander that they're willing to remain here a few more weeks to help us fortify the border, then return to Winterfell for the harvest. As for King's Landing itself, no raven has come from the Queen Regent since the battle ended." Selyse raised an eyebrow. "No demands? No threats?" "Not yet, my lady," Davos said, "but I expect we'll see one soon enough. Either in writing or in the form of another army if Cersei decides to risk it again." Jon exhaled, looking over the men in the hall. "In that case, we need to act quickly. Storm's End must be repaired. Our walls, our food stores, everything. We'll send a formal letter to King's Landing, stating our position. The Stormlands stand with the North, and we're open to negotiation, but not capitulation." It might buy us some time or at least shape the narrative. Sely's gaze flicked to him, approval evident in her eyes. Agreed. And I want to send riders to the lesser lords in the Stormlands who might be wavering. Let them know we're not broken, far from it. House Baratheon still commands here, and we have new strength at our side. A silence followed her words. Though they had triumphed, the cost was evident in every wounded man, every missing face. But the hall was filled with a gritty determination that reminded Jon of a winter encampment. He shared a long look with Sely, a sense that their bond, initially political, had become something deeper. They had crossed a threshold together in battle, and the respect between them glinted like steel. Before the War Council broke up, Davos produced a small sheaf of parchment. Also, there's something you should see, he said. Ravens from the Reach? The region is still reeling from what happened during the last war. Highgarden fell to the Lannisters, and with House Tyrell nearly extinguished, the lesser lords are struggling for stability. But they might be open to forging alliances against the crown. Sely scanned the letters. They speak of bandits, broken supply lines, there's a power vacuum. The Lannisters took the bulk of the Reach's grain for King's Landing, and now many are struggling to feed their own small folk. Jon skimmed as well. If we support them in some way, food, protection, they might give us allies in return. The Stormlands can't feed the entire Reach, though. We barely have enough for ourselves. Davos nodded. True, but an alliance doesn't always require a feast of provisions. Sometimes a promise of mutual defense can carry weight. If they see the Stormlands defying the Lannisters and surviving, they might be emboldened. Sely set down the parchment. Then we'll keep that door open. For now, let's focus on recovery. I'll not risk sending more troops to the Reach when we've just come through a siege. They concluded the council with tasks delegated. Letters to be written, resources to be tallied, outposts to be manned. Outside, the gray sky had darkened further, threatening another torrent of rain. Storm's End often felt like it stood at the threshold of a perpetual gale, but never had its name been more apt than in these days of near-constant strife. Late that evening, Sely sat with Jon in a smaller solar adjoining their bedchamber. A single brazier provided flickering warmth. Their meal was simple: dark bread, salted fish, a bit of wine from what remained of the stores. Both wore the exhaustion of leaders who had spent too many hours bent over logistics and casualty lists. She let out a soft sigh, setting her goblet aside. We're safe for the moment, but it doesn't feel like victory. Jon took a measured sip of wine. We won the day. That counts for something. There's a lull in the fighting, time to breathe, to plan. It might be all we get. She studied him in the dancing light of the brazier. You've never wanted power or titles, I think. Yet you stand in the midst of it. He pushed a strand of dark hair away from his forehead. I've been forced into leadership before. At the Wall, in the north. Duty usually left me with few choices. And you were thrust into this when your uncles fell, when the Stormlands needed a Baratheon presence. Sely's gaze dropped to the floor. Yes. My father died too soon, and my uncles Robert, Stannis, Renly were consumed by rebellion and wars. I was raised in Storm's End's shadows, never meant to be the sole hope of the Baratheon line. Now I am. Jon set his goblet down and leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. You're not alone. We stand together. She reached out and let her hand cover his. I know. And for that, I'm grateful. They fell into a quiet that was almost comfortable despite the tensions swirling beyond the fortress walls. Outside, the wind growled, rattling the shutters, but here in this small chamber, they found a rare moment of calm. The warmth of her hand in his reminded Jon that alliances were forged as much in tenderness as in steel. Early the next morning, the next phase of their campaign for survival began. Masons and carpenters arrived from outlying towns, seeking work and ready to assist in repairs. Smiths clanged in the courtyard, forging arrowheads and reinforcing battered shields. Teams of foragers were sent into the forests and coastlines to gather whatever fresh food they could find. Gulls wheeled overhead as fishing boats ventured into the stormy bay, risking high waves in pursuit of the bounty that might feed those within the castle. As days passed, Sely and Jon walked among the men, checking on morale. They encouraged the battered knights, offered respectful gratitude to the northern allies who still manned the ramparts, and reassured refugees who clustered in the fortress yard. Sely personally oversaw the rationing process, ensuring that small folk who had lost their homes to the Lannister advance were not left to starve. That won her quiet loyalty from many corners. Jon, for his part, mediated disputes among Stormlander lords who sometimes bickered about their responsibilities. In each instance, he strove for fairness that mirrored the code he had lived by in the Night's Watch, though this time he was no brother in black. He was a leader, and with that came the burden of shaping the Stormlands' future. Meanwhile, they waited for word from King's Landing. Ravens came and went, bearing trifling messages from minor houses or bits of news from the Reach and the Riverlands. But the capital remained silent. No sign of another Lannister army on the march, no official declaration of war nor of peace. That silence was its own kind of threat. Finally, on a windy afternoon when the sun broke through a bank of clouds, a rider arrived at the gate, bearing the crest of the Crownlands. He was a weary courier, his horse lathered from hard riding. The letter he carried bore Cersei's seal. Jon and Selyse read the contents together in the presence of Davos and a few trusted knights. To Lady Selyse Baratheon of Storm's End and to Jon Snow of the North. By order of the Crown, your recent aggression against our royal forces is noted. The Iron Throne demands immediate reparations for this unprovoked violence. Should you refuse, know that you stand as rebels against the rightful Queen Regent of Westeros. Lay down your arms, send hostages to King's Landing to ensure your good conduct, and pay the Crown's levy in gold and provisions. Only thus may the Stormlands be spared further bloodshed. Signed, Cersei of House Lannister. The words reeked of arrogance and twisted truths. Jon felt anger coil in his chest at the blatant manipulation, calling the defense of their own castle unprovoked violence. He glanced at Selyse, who was reading the letter again, her jaw clenched. She demands we submit and send hostages, she said, voice taut with rage. After they invaded our lands and attacked us? It's beyond insulting. Davos's mouth pressed into a thin line. Typical Lannister turnabout. She wants to paint us as aggressors. Jon let out a slow breath. We can't yield to that. But if we outright refuse, she'll declare open war. We already have war in all but name. Selyse folded the parchment, setting it aside. Let her declare it. We haven't the goal to pay her levy, nor would we send our own people as hostages. The question is, do we respond at all, or remain silent? Davos scratched his beard, frowning. Silence might be taken as contempt. A refusal, carefully worded, might at least give you the upper hand in the court of public opinion, such as it exists. If the realm sees that you tried to negotiate but were faced with unreasonable demands, you might keep some houses from siding with the Lannisters. Jon straightened. We'll write back. We'll say we reject her claim that we attacked first and we stand ready to defend ourselves. We'll reaffirm we hold the Stormlands by right and that any aggression toward us will be met in kind. No insults, no rash words, just a statement of fact. Selyse's eyes lit with a cold fire. Agreed. We'll do so at once. Let her know we won't be cowed. That evening they composed their reply. The language was measured, refusing the demands but stopping short of directly insulting Cersei. Jon's hand didn't shake as he wrote the final lines. In his heart he knew the path was set. Whatever illusions of a peaceful solution might have lingered were now gone. Cersei Lannister would never rest until the Stormlands were hers to subdue unless she found an insurmountable resistance. And that was what he and Selyse intended to forge. When the Raven flew off toward King's Landing with their letter, a hush seemed to descend upon the castle. It was as if everyone sensed the fragile calm might soon break. Yet the tasks of rebuilding continued. Each day saw more wounded on the mend, more repairs completed. Under Selyse's directions, the fortress's armory swelled with refurbished weapons and a system of signals was established between Storm's End and the smaller watchtowers along the interior roads. On the 7th day after they'd sent their reply, a band of mounted strangers appeared at Storm's End's gates. The guards sounded the horns and Jon, Selyse, and Davos hurried to the parapets. At first, they feared another wave of Lannisters. But the riders bore different banners, brown and gold, a stylized huntsman on horseback. Ser Davos squinted. House Tarly's old sigil, or a variation of it? But after the Tyrells fell, the Tarlys, well, that's complicated. Selyse called down to the gate guards. Open it, but keep your weapons ready. The drawbridge lowered and the visitors were escorted inside the courtyard. Their leader was a tall man of middle age, wearing leather armor buckled with plates of steel. He dismounted, then approached with careful deference. Jon and Selyse descended to meet him, flanked by a dozen armed knights. The man bowed. My Lady Baratheon, Lord Snow. I come representing certain lords of the Reach who remain unaligned with the crown. My name is Garren Tarly. Selyse exchanged a glance with Jon. House Tarly had once been among the fiercest supporters of the Tyrells. Their main seat was Hornhill and they were renowned for discipline and martial skill. Yet Randyll Tarly had sided with the Lannisters at one point and met a grim fate under Daenerys Targaryen's rule. But times had changed drastically since then. Welcome to Storm's End, Ser Garren, Selyse said. Or do you claim the title Lord Tarly? He shook his head. No, my lady. My father held Hornhill after Randyll Tarly's death, but the line is fractured and the realm is in chaos. I do not presume to claim a title that has led so many to sorrow. But I speak with the voice of several Reach lords who wish to resist Lannister tyranny. Jon studied him carefully. You've traveled a long way. Our fight with the Lannisters is no secret, but if you've come seeking alliance, I'd hear your offer. Garen's gaze flicked around the courtyard, taking in the dire wolf that lurked under an archway, the lines of Stormlander soldiers. We know of your siege and your victory. Word travels quickly. The Lannisters have extracted heavy tributes from what remains of the Reach to feed King's Landing. Many of us are on the brink of ruin. Starvation is not a future we wish to endure. Selyse raised an eyebrow. You hope we can relieve that? We hope you can help us cast off Lannister rule, Garen replied. Our militias are scattered, but we still have thousands of able-bodied men across the Reach. We lack a unifying banner, and the Tyrell name is all but extinct. If the Stormlands and the North stand with us, we might drive the Lannisters from our lands. In return, we can offer farmland, trade routes, a renewed alliance that would strengthen us all. Jon frowned. Open war on multiple fronts. The realm is weary of bloodshed. Still, Cersei has left us no choice but to defend ourselves. If you are genuine, your men could flank the Lannisters and cut supply lines to King's Landing. That alone would be a great advantage. Davos took a step forward regarding Garen with skepticism. Why should we trust your claim to speak for the Reach? The Tarly name, you say, is fractured. You have no official seat. How do we know this isn't some Lannister ploy? Garen's face grew solemn. I cannot prove my sincerity with mere words. But I have letters from several minor lords and one from the Lady of Old Oak. They detail their grievances. None were fully allied with the Lannisters, they were coerced or left in dire straits. They see the success of Storm's End against the Crown's forces and they want to stand with you. He handed over a bundle of parchment. Selyse skimmed them and her expression softened slightly. I know some of these signatures. House Huey, House O'Hart, these are old families, well-regarded ones. They're scattered but not powerless. Jon looked at Davos. We have to consider this carefully, but it might be the opening we need. If the Reach truly unites against the Lannisters, it splits their power. They'll have to divide their forces between us and the Western approach. And if the Iron Bank is pressing them for debts, they can't sustain a long two-front war. Selyse turned her attention back to Garen. Stay as our guest while we consider your proposal. We'll treat you with respect so long as you do the same. Garen bowed. You have my gratitude, my lady. They showed him and his retinue to some sparse but decent rooms in the fortress. Afterward, Jon, Selyse, and Davos retreated to their council chamber, joined by a few trusted knights and northern officers. Outside, the wind battered the walls, whistling through arrow slits. Selyse spread out the parchments. If we answer the Reach's call, we commit ourselves to a new front. Could we muster the men for that while still protecting Storm's End? One of the northern officers, a bearded man named Lord Glenmore, cleared his throat. We have a modest force here, my lady, but my Lady Sansa will not be able to send many more at this time. Winter hasn't fully loosened its grip in the far north, and the harvest can't be jeopardized. Davos said, perhaps we don't need to send a huge army. If we dispatch a smaller force, a few hundred knights and foot, just enough to spark a coordinated uprising in the Reach, that might be sufficient. The Lannisters can't be everywhere at once. Jon pressed his palms against the rough wood of the table. It's risky, but ignoring the Reach might be riskier. If the Lannisters quell dissent there, they'll gain free rein to come at us again. A second siege could be worse, especially if they bring more siege engines or hire Sellsword companies. Selyse tapped a finger on one of the letters, her expression thoughtful. We survived the last siege because of the North's timely intervention. But we can't count on that miracle again. If we can sow enough trouble for the Lannisters in the Reach, they'll be forced to divert their strength. And if the rebels there gather momentum, we might gain a real chance at forcing Cersei to negotiate. The council debated for hours. Ultimately, they decided on a measured gamble. Storm's End would dispatch a modest force to the Reach, led by a Stormlander knight of solid reputation, Ser Roland Connington, along with a small retinue of skilled northern scouts. Their goal would be to train and organize the local militias, not to launch a full-scale invasion. Meanwhile, Storm's End would remain heavily garrisoned, prepared for any direct retaliation from King's Landing. That same night, Jon and Selyse informed Garen Tarly of their decision. Relief and hope danced across his features. He pledged that, if the mission succeeded, the grateful lords of the Reach would rally en masse. You'll see the banners once loyal to Highgarden rise anew, he said. And this time, we'll not let the Lannisters crush us. Over the next few days, the chosen knights packed supplies, sharpened swords, readied horses. Jon had long discussions with Ser Roland Connington and the Northern Scouts, outlining what they might face and how to stay in contact. They agreed on a system of ravens and coded messages, so the Lannisters could not intercept their plans. When at last the small contingent rode out, it was under a drizzling sky, their banners half furled against the weather, their hearts steeled for a precarious mission. Storm's End settled back into its rhythms, an anxious waiting that gnawed at everyone's nerves. Every morning, riders patrolled the lands nearest the fortress. Every evening, they returned with reports of stillness. No new Lannister troops on the horizon. The northern host that had saved Storm's End gradually began to depart, though a core of a few hundred men stayed behind. They needed to return home and see to their own harvests, as Lord Glenmore had warned, but they pledged to remain allies should the tides of war shift again. In the quiet that followed, Jon and Selyse found themselves with a little more time to speak, to understand each other beyond the press of warfare. One afternoon, with the rain slackening to a drizzle, they walked the length of Storm's End's outer curtain wall, stepping around puddles and rubble that still hadn't been fully cleared. Ghost trotted behind them, occasionally pausing to sniff at cracks in the stone. "When this all began," Selyse said, glancing sidelong at Jon, "I never imagined we'd be forging such a complex path, marrying a Stark or a Snow. It was meant as a practical alliance. Now, after everything," he studied her profile. "You regret it?" She shook her head. "No, I can't regret anything that gave us the strength to stand against the Lannisters. But I sometimes wonder if we'll ever see a time without war. If we manage to force a peace, is that the end of it? Or does another threat always rise, as soon as we let down our guard?" He leaned against a merlin, the damp stone soaking into his sleeves. "I used to believe in bigger threats than men, the long night, the army of the dead, things we faced beyond the wall. I saw them vanish, but we humans seem to keep making our own horrors." She set a hand on his arm. "And yet we keep fighting for what's right. That means something." A wry smile touched his lips. I suppose it does. The storms may never end, but we can weather them if we stand firm." They continued along the battlement, the sea rumbling in the distance. Below them, the courtyard thronged with smiths, servants, and guards. Here and there, a few Stormlanders paused to bow. Selyse offered them polite nods but kept her focus on the discussion at hand. That evening, as they sat in the great hall with a reduced group of advisors, a raven arrived bearing Ser Roland Connington's first report from the Reach. In coded language, it relayed that they had arrived near Old Oak, meeting with Lord Oakhart and Lady Kiwi. The locals were in poor shape, fields burned by roving marauders, winter stores raided by Lannister inspectors. But the people's spirit remained unbroken. Already, they'd begun drilling local farmhands, turning them into a rudimentary militia. Morale was cautiously rising at the sight of actual knights from the Stormlands who pledged them support. Selyse read the letter aloud. He says that some Tarly men are assisting him in training the militias. Apparently, Garin Tarly's credibility was enough to sway a few of the more skeptical lords. They planned small raids on Lannister foraging parties that crossed the Mandar River. If that yields success, more lords might join. Jon nodded. That's good news. The more the Lannisters have to worry about the Reach, the less they can focus here. Davos tapped a finger on the table. "We must be careful, though. If they push too hard, the Lannisters will send a large force to crush the rebellion. The entire campaign could collapse unless there's enough local support to hold them off." "We can't do more than we're already doing," Selyse said, folding the parchment. "We wait, we fortify, and we hope that the seeds we've sown in the Reach take root. In the meantime, Storm's End stands vigil." So the days turned to weeks. Raven after raven fluttered out from the rookery and messages drifted back in response, each carefully encoded. The news from the Reach proved encouraging. Small strikes harried Lannister convoys, capturing wagons of grain meant for King's Landing. A few minor fortresses that had been loyal to the crown abruptly switched sides, seeing better prospects with the rebel alliance than with an increasingly isolated Queen Regent. While the Lannisters undoubtedly took notice, no massive counter-invasion had yet materialized. Within Storm's End, the mood improved, but not without lingering tension. Food was still rationed carefully. Many families had lost relatives in the siege. Whispers flew about a future in which the Stormlands might be recognized as an autonomous region allied with the North, forming a significant obstacle to Lannister dominion. Others whispered of even larger ambitions. Some Stormlanders spoke of placing Selyse on the throne if ever the Lannisters were toppled. But she dismissed such notions sternly whenever they arose. "I have no desire to sit a throne that devours its occupiers," she would say, echoing sentiments Jon himself understood too well. Then, late one night, the watchmen sounded alarm horns again. Jon and Selyse rushed to the battlements, swords belted, hearts hammering as they peered into the darkness. The silhouettes of torches glimmered along the old road that led from King's Landing. A rider galloped ahead, waving something white, a flag of parley. Archers knocked arrows but held their shot, awaiting the order to loose. Through the gloom, a voice cried, "We come to speak under truce. Let us pass." Jon exchanged a look with Selyse, who nodded to the guards. The gates creaked open enough for the visitor to enter under heavy escort. Moments later, in the courtyard lit by torches, they found themselves face to face with none other than Jaime Lannister. His golden hair, once so famed, was now streaked with silver at the temples. He had only a stump where his sword hand should be, covered by a fitted golden cap. He wore a cloak of Lannister red, though it was soaked with rain and mud. Behind him rode 3 knights of the King's Guard, equally bedraggled. One bore a plain white banner of truce. Jon's grip on his sword hilt tightened. Ghost stood at his side, baring teeth in a silent snarl. Jaime's gaze flicked to the dire wolf, and something unreadable crossed his face. Selyse's voice cut through the swirl of torchlight. "Sir Jaime, you come alone." Jaime dismounted with awkward grace, favoring his good hand. "My sister, the Queen Regent, has sent me to discuss terms. I come under parley, seeking safe conduct." Jon folded his arms, not taking his eyes off the King Guard. "We have your word this isn't some trick?" Jaime's jaw tightened. "You have my word as a knight, though I know it may mean little to you. The men behind me bear the same oath. We aren't here to fight." Davos and a handful of Stormlander knights surrounded them. The tension was a living thing, pressing in from all sides. After a heavy pause, Selyse nodded once. "Very well. You're under truce in Storm's End. No harm will come to you so long as you do not attempt treachery. We'll speak in the Great Hall." So it was that Jaime Lannister found himself seated in the same hall that once housed the wedding feast of Jon and Selyse, the same hall that had rung with cheers after their victory over the siege. The Lannisters' presence now felt like an intrusion, a golden silhouette in a place of stags and dire wolves. He accepted a cup of watered wine, took a cursory sip, and set it down. Jon and Selyse took their seats at the high table. Davos stood at Jon's side, watchful as a hawk. A ring of soldiers circled the hall, each with a hand near a sword or bow. Jaime's 3 King Guard companions remained a few paces behind him, eyes alert through the slits of their helms. A hush fell that seemed to stretch on forever, broken only by the distant whistle of the wind outside. Jaime was first to speak. "I'm sure you've guessed that my sister's not in the habit of offering generous terms to those who defy her. She's lost many men and resources in the Stormlands already. She doesn't want more bloodshed provided certain conditions are met." Selyse snorted softly. "She's cost us plenty of blood too. And her demands in her last letter were impossible. If she thinks we'll send hostages or pay for the damage her own armies caused, she's either mad or desperate." Jaime ran his hand through his damp hair. "Perhaps both. She's determined, that much is certain. But the war is spreading. The crown can ill afford to fight on multiple fronts." Jon watched him, searching for any sign of subterfuge. Jaime sounded weary, as though the burdens of war had weighed on him far too long. Yet a Lannister's word was suspect, even at the best of times. "So what does Cersei propose?" he asked. Jaime's green eyes lifted to meet Jon's. "She wants you to stand down your alliance with the Reach. Withdraw any forces you've sent there, cease any assistance. If you do this and swear an oath to remain neutral, she'll acknowledge Selyse Baratheon as Lady of the Stormlands under the crown. That means no further attempts to besiege Storm's End, no forced levies. In exchange, the Stormlands pay a reasonable tax to King's Landing, less than what she demanded before, and swear not to harbor rebels." A hush descended. Selyse's eyes blazed. "Harbor rebels? The men of the Reach who rise against the Lannisters do so for good cause. My father and uncles fought for their beliefs. By that logic, Robert Baratheon would have been just a rebel if we see the world through your sister's eyes." Jaime's mouth twisted. "In truth, everyone's a rebel in someone else's story. But you asked for Cersei's terms, and these are them. End your support of the Reach, revert to a vassal relationship with the crown, and keep the Stormlands out of the war to come." Davos's voice cut in, laced with scorn. "She's offering us the same chain, only gilded?" Jon placed a hand on the table. "We won't betray those who look to us for help. And we won't become vassals in all but name. If that's her final offer, surrender the reach, remain docile, and pay tribute, then she's already lost. A flicker of something that might have been respect crossed Jaime's face. I see. My sister suspected as much. Then she bade me warn you, a larger force is gathering at King's Landing. The gold reserves of Casterly Rock are buying mercenaries. She says that next time, no northern host will arrive in time to spare you. And if you persist in aiding the reach, she'll ensure the Stormlands burn. Selyse stood abruptly, her chair scraping the floor. Soldiers along the walls gripped their weapons. Jaime's Kingsguard tensed. But Jaime himself made no move, only watched her with a solemn expression. You come here under a flag of truce and threaten us with fire and blood? She demanded, voice rising. Did you think we would cower? Jaime shook his head slowly. I came here to relay my sister's ultimatum. Whether or not you cower is your choice. But I know you've endured one siege and you might not endure a second. She's cunning. If you believe you can outlast her, consider how many Sellswords gold can buy. Westeros is rife with companies looking for an easy purse. Jon looked at Selyse, then at Jaime. And what of you, Kingslayer? Do you share your sister's zeal to see the Stormlands bent or broken? A shadow passed over Jaime's face. I've grown tired of war. Tired of our family's endless debts of blood. If I could end this, I would. But I stand by my word to come here and deliver her demands. I cannot betray my sister openly any more than I already have. Selyse's chest heaved with a single, furious breath. She glanced at Jon. His expression was calmer but no less resolute. They both knew there was no acceptance in these terms. She turned back to Jaime. Then you have our answer. The Stormlands will not withdraw its support from the Reach. Will not kneel to Cersei's demands, nor pretend neutrality in a war that's already at our doorstep. Jaime rose. I expected as much. He gestured to his Kingsguard. We'll leave at first light. Davos took a step forward. That's it then? You come all this way for an hour's conversation? Jaime shrugged with his good shoulder. It was worth a final attempt at avoiding more bloodshed. But I see you've all made up your minds. Jon's voice was clipped. We have. Return to King's Landing and tell her so. Jaime nodded, took his leave under heavy guard, and was ushered to a small guest tower locked from the outside for safety. The next morning, Selyse and Jon watched as the gates opened again to let him and his company ride out, accompanied by an armed escort that would see them beyond the Stormlands border. The exchange had ended no differently than they had expected. The lines were drawn, and the war would continue, only now both sides understood that compromise was dead. In the days that followed, the gloom around Storm's End deepened. Soldiers spoke of the next siege as an inevitability. The rumor that Casterly Gold would buy foreign Sellswords spread like wildfire. Tension and fear threatened to take root. Yet in the midst of this dark anticipation, a bright spark arrived, new ravens from Sir Roland Cunnington in the Reach, bearing news of success. The coded letters spoke of multiple small victories, Lannister supply lines disrupted, key roads blocked, local lords defecting in droves. It appeared that, for now, the Lannisters were stretched too thin to mount a decisive blow there, especially with King's Landing's attention fixated on the Stormlands. The rebels were growing confident, building a patchwork alliance in the name of restoring autonomy to the Reach, or at least ending Lannister oppression. Selyse met Jon's gaze over the parchment. They're making real progress. If they keep this up, the Lannisters will have to divide their forces. Perhaps they'll buy Sellswords, but mercenaries can be fickle. Gold holds them together, but if they suspect the losing side, they might cut and run. Jon nodded. Every day they fail to crush the Reach is a day Storm's End can strengthen its defenses. We should push to finalize alliances with more houses beyond the Reach. Maybe the Riverlands, if the Tully remnants are looking for a chance to be free of Lannister meddling, they might join. Davos scratched at his beard. That's a possibility, though the Riverlands have been ravaged by the wars. They might have little left to give. Still, a show of unity could tip the scales. And if the Iron Bank refuses to lend more gold to Cersei, her ability to pay those Sellswords might falter. They drafted more letters, sending ravens to the Riverlands, the Vale, and even a few discreet inquiries to Dorne. Though Dorne had historically been aloof, House Martell's downfall under the Lannisters had left behind a deep resentment. Perhaps a new leader in Dorne would see an opportunity. The Stormlands and Dorne had once warred bitterly in centuries past, but now times had changed. An ally was an ally. Weeks slipped by, the summer sun piercing the gloom more often, though storms still passed over the fortress with an unsettling frequency. Summer in Westeros could be fickle, especially so far south. The orchard trees around Storm's End bore fruit, providing some relief to the rationing. Fishermen brought modest catches from the bay. Life continued, even amid the tension of looming war. A month after Jaime's departure, a new wave of riders appeared on the horizon, but this time it was no Lannister envoy. Scouts reported a small retinue of knights under a banner of blue and silver. Jon and Selyse recognized it as the sigil of House Tully, a leaping trout on a field of red and blue. Surprise rippled through Storm's End. The Tullys had been overshadowed ever since the death of their lord, Hoster Tully, and the fall of Riverrun to the Freys and Lannisters. Could it be that House Tully was rebuilding itself? The retinue was admitted with caution. At its head rode a slight, middle-aged woman who carried herself with quiet pride. She introduced herself as Mirielle Tully, a distant cousin of the late Edmure Tully, newly returned from a period of exile in the Free Cities. She had come, she said, to speak on behalf of the scattered Tully loyalists still living in the Riverlands, hidden from the prying eyes of the Freys and Lannisters. Over a tense meal with Davos and several Stormlander knights present, Mirielle explained that Edmure Tully was rumored to be alive but still a captive, while the Freys had grown weaker after repeated uprisings. She claimed the small folk yearned for an end to Lannister Frey dominance. The Riverlands have been a battleground too long, she said, her voice quavering with a mix of passion and fatigue. If we could see a chance of winning, many would rise to restore Tully leadership or at least to cast out the Freys and Lannisters. Selyse listened intently. How many men could you rally? The Riverlands have been decimated. Mirielle folded her hands. Not many knights, but we have determined small folk and some lesser lords who hate the Freys for the Red Wedding, though they've been forced to kneel out of fear. With a show of strength, they would side with us. If you and your allies in the Reach strike in concert, it might tear the Lannister hold on the region apart. Jon studied her. She looked like a woman haunted by her homeland's sorrow, thin shoulders, face lined with worry. He saw sincerity there, a reflection of what he had witnessed so often, families torn by endless war, lands ravaged by competing armies. He also knew that opening yet another front might stretch their resources. But if the Riverlands rose, that was yet another blow to Lannister power. He exchanged a glance with Davos, who gave a small nod. Then he looked to Selyse. It's another risk. But the more regions openly defy the crown, the more likely Cersei is forced to negotiate or face total collapse. If we can coordinate with the Riverlands and the Reach, King's Landing may not hold out for long, even with foreign sellswords. Selyse rubbed her temples. The question is whether we can trust these pockets of resistance not to fold at the first sign of trouble. We can't be everywhere at once, and a single defeat might shatter morale. But it's also true that if we ignore this opportunity, we might regret it. She studied Mirielle. You've risked much coming here. Why Storm's End? Mirielle's reply was steady. Because Lady Baratheon stands openly against the Lannisters and survived their siege. Because Jon Snow has the respect of the North and rumors say he's not a man to break his word. And because there are no Tyrells left in Highgarden, no Martells in Sunspear, and no Arryn in the Vale who will raise a banner right now. You remain. A hush settled in the room. It was a sobering truth, so many great houses had been slaughtered or gutted by the wars of the last few years. House Baratheon was nearly extinct. Selyse was, in many ways, the last significant scion. House Stark had been brutally reduced, leaving Sansa to hold the North. House Tully was a shadow of its former self. House Tyrell was gone, replaced by opportunists. House Martell had been wiped out in the aftermath of Dorne's rebellion, and House Lannister ruled King's Landing with diminishing legitimacy. Westeros itself felt like a tapestry with half the threads torn out. Selyse nodded slowly. We'll consider your request. I won't promise an army, but perhaps we can offer some form of aid, advisors, weapons, a little gold if we can spare it. Enough to help you organize and strike at key points. If we coordinate with the Reach Rebellion, it might be enough to turn the tide. Mirielle's eyes lit with relief. Thank you, my lady. After she retired to her quarters, Jon and Selyse remained with Davos in the flickering torchlight of the Great Hall. Servants tidied away the remnants of the meal and knights drifted out, leaving the trio to ponder in hushed voices. Davos folded his arms. We're inching ever closer to open war on all sides. No matter how carefully we move, we're becoming the center of a widespread resistance against King's Landing. Jon nodded. A rebellion that could topple the Lannisters, but at great cost if it fails. Selyse's jaw tightened. We've already declared ourselves. There's no going back. If we succeed in rallying the Reach and the Riverlands and the North stands by us, it may be enough. The question is whether Cersei's Sells words tip the scales the other way. They ended the night with no definitive answers, only the promise that new storms would gather. The next mornings were spent dispatching ravens to coordinate with Cannington in the Reach and discreetly to Mirielle's contacts in the Riverlands. They authorized small shipments of arms, spears, swords, crossbow bolts. Some gold was scraped together from the vaults of Storm's End, though it was not a princely sum. Amid these preparations, the castle's daily life continued. Slice personally intervened in a dispute between two Stormlander lords squabbling over land boundaries. Jon oversaw archery drills, ensuring that new recruits learned to hit targets even in the gusty coastal winds. Ghost remained a steadfast presence, patrolling corridors like an incorruptible sentinel. Letters arrived from the north. Sansa wrote that she was doing what she could, but winter was receding slowly and she could not muster a full host without jeopardizing her own region's stability. Still, she pledged moral support and promised that if the Lannisters marched north of the Neck, the North would answer. Each night, Jon and Slice took stock of their progress, side by side, the closeness between them deepening in a way that transcended convenience. They were partners in every sense, co-rulers of a beleaguered stronghold, a united front in the face of an empire's wrath, and increasingly, two people whose bond was forged by shared burdens and small intimacies in the quiet hours. Then came the day when Storm's End scouts spotted a fresh force gathering on the horizon. This time it was not a ragtag group of Lannisters. The dust rising from the main road hinted at numbers too large for a mere scouting party. Horns blared the alarm. Soldiers rushed to the ramparts. Jon, Slice, and Davos joined them, hearts pounding. At first, gloom set in. Had Cersei already hired the Sellswords? Was the new invasion about to commence? But as the banners emerged from the haze, they were not the golden lions of Lannister. A swirl of different devices appeared, Hightower's beacon, the fleur-de-lis of House Florent, and half a dozen others from the Reach. At their head, riding side by side, were Ser Roland Cannington and Garin Tarly. Slice's breath caught. They've come here? With so many men? Davos narrowed his eyes. Looks like a small army. Perhaps they want to strike at King's Landing from the Stormlands? Or maybe they needed a more defensible rendezvous than Old Oak. Jon turned to her. Let's meet them in the courtyard. But keep our men on alert. We can't be sure they're not bringing Lannister infiltrators. Moments later, Storm's End's gates opened to admit this unexpected host. Knights in battered armor, footmen carrying spears, a mishmash of banners representing smaller houses from the Reach. They looked travel-worn but determined. At the front, Ser Roland Cannington halted his horse with a salute to Slice. Garin Tarly, riding close by, looked just as tired but wore a triumphant smile. Behind them, a grizzled old knight held aloft a banner in which the gold rose of House Tyrell had been crudely replaced by a stylized oak leaf interwoven with a stag. It was a new symbol of unity, though it would likely offend Old Guard Tyrell loyalists. Necessity had birthed strange alliances. Cannington dismounted and bowed. My lady, my lord, we've made progress in the Reach, enough that a unified banner has formed under our coalition. But we need more. We've come to swear ourselves openly to House Baratheon's cause and request that you lead us. A stunned silence filled the courtyard. Slice's eyes flicked from the ranks of soldiers to Cannington, then to Garin Tarly, who nodded in affirmation. Jon stepped forward. That's a bold request. You're talking about unifying the Stormlands with a large portion of the Reach in open defiance of the Lannisters. Garin spoke, voice resonating with conviction. They call us rebels, traitors. Let them. We believe House Lannister has no claim to the loyalty they demand. Not after everything they've done. We've been forced to pick sides, and we choose Storm's End and the North. We choose you. Slice looked momentarily taken aback. Then a flicker of pride lit her features. If you stand with us, we'll stand with you. But I have no illusions. This means open war. This means that once word spreads, Cersei will unleash whatever force she can muster. Cannington straightened. We're past the point of no return, my lady. Many lords in the Reach have already seized Lannister properties, attacked their convoys. The Tyrell name is gone. House Baratheon is the nearest link to the old alliances. If you accept us, we'll serve you as we served the Tyrells of old. Davos, standing beside Jon, could not hide his surprise. So the Reach is effectively placing itself under Baratheon leadership? A second time, if you recall Robert's rebellion, though that was a different affair. This This is unprecedented. Slice took a long breath. I grew up hearing stories of how my father raised the Stormlands to overthrow the Targaryens. Now, you're asking us to lead you in a revolt against the Lannisters. Are you certain? Garen's jaw set. My lady, we have no choice. The Lannisters have starved us, taxed us beyond endurance. They claim the Iron Throne but offer no justice. We want to fight for something better. Around them, the gathered soldiers gave nods and murmurs of assent. The courtyard seemed to pulse with the collective energy of men and women on the brink of a pivotal shift. Jon felt the weight of it in his chest. An entire region, battered but unbroken, rallying under the stags and direwolves to confront a power that had reigned in King's Landing for years. He remembered Robert's rebellion, told in stories at Winterfell, and how the Baratheon name had once ignited the realm. Was history repeating itself in an odd, reversed way? Slice glanced at Jon. We need to talk. Let's bring Ser Roland and Garen into the Great Hall. Davos, you'll join us. We'll hear them out fully. So they moved inside, a swirl of activity as the new arrivals handed off horses to stable hands and filed after their leaders. The Great Hall filled with the sense of wet cloaks and sweat. Servants hurried to bring wine and bread for the unexpected guests. Guards took up watchful positions along the walls. Outside, the sky darkened, thunder muttering in the distance as if the very weather recognized a momentous decision loomed. Ser Roland Cannington removed his helmet, revealing a lined face and close-cropped hair, flecked with gray from stress and battles. My lady, he began once everyone settled. These men come from across the western and southern reach, houses Florent, Huey, even a few lesser branches of House Hightower. We've been picking apart Lannister supply lines, capturing outposts, and rallying small folk. We now number some thousands, though not all are seasoned fighters. Rather than fragment further, we decided to combine forces and place ourselves under your banner. Slice's gaze swept the hall, absorbing the determined expressions. And your plan is to mass in the Stormlands, then strike at King's Landing? Or do you expect we'll march with you? Garen Tarly bowed his head. We need leadership, my lady. Many of our lords admire Robert's memory. He was the Storm Lord who took the throne from the Targaryens. They see a parallel here. The Lannisters hold the throne unjustly, and you carry Baratheon blood in your veins. They think you can unify us where we might otherwise bicker or collapse. A hush. Then Davos cleared his throat. This is near to crowning you a queen, my lady. Slice's face flushed slightly, but she remained composed. I never sought a crown. Our fight was always about defending the Stormlands. But if the Reach stands behind us, if the Riverlands stir, if the North supports us, then the Lannisters are truly endangered. Jon's fingers tapped the armrest of his chair. You said it yourself, though, this is open war. Once the realm sees this coalition forming, we become a rival seat of power to King's Landing. Connington nodded. Some say that if we triumph, you should claim the Iron Throne, or at least name a different monarch. The people want stability. They won't accept a continuing, endless civil war. Slice inhaled sharply. A queen of Westeros? Is that what we're heading toward? I've no desire to replicate the tyranny we're trying to depose. Garen Tarly raised his hands. Forgive me, my lady. We don't demand you proclaim yourself queen tomorrow. But a banner must wave over the host. A figure must lead the cause, or we're just rebels without direction. Jon looked at her, reading the flicker of turmoil in her eyes. He felt his own heart constrict with the memory of titles he'd worn, Lord Commander, King in the North, each bringing more strife than peace. But he also recognized that if the realm was to unite, it often did so under a single banner. Robert's rebellion had proven that. Daenerys Targaryen's campaign had proven it again, however tragically it ended. Finally, Slice lifted her chin. We will stand as protectors of these lands. If the people want to call us leaders, so be it, but I make no claim on a throne unless it becomes the only way to end this war and restore justice. Is that understood? A rumble of agreement swept through the hall. Ser Roland and Garen both nodded eagerly, relief evident in their expressions. The old soldier with the improvised Oakenstag banner gave a hoarse cheer. Others murmured that they would follow wherever Lady Baratheon led. The scene was charged with a sense of destiny, as if the ghosts of Westeros watched from unseen corners. Davos placed a steadying hand on Slice's shoulder. Then let it be. We fight not for conquest but for the freedom of our homes from Lannister tyranny. Let the realm see this is not a savage rebellion but a necessary stand for survival. Jon added quietly, we do this with open eyes, knowing many will die. But better to face it honestly than yield to a corrupt crown. The next few days became a whirlwind of organization. The men from the Reach needed quarters, provisions, and assignments. Some were housed in tents outside the castle walls while the fortress interior filled to capacity. Slice organized an emergency ration plan, ensuring the newcomers would not starve Storm's End empty in a month. Garrisons were set up in strategic points around the Stormlands, forging a defensive perimeter that would warn against any Lannister approach. Ravens flew in and out at all hours, carrying word of the newly formed coalition to the Riverlands, the north, and even to watchers in Dorne. With each passing sunrise, the sense of inevitability grew. Sooner or later, Cersei would learn that the rebels were gathering in the Stormlands. She would see that a second Robert's rebellion, of sorts, was rising, though led now by a Baratheon woman and an erstwhile king in the north. The question remained, would she attack with all her might or try one last cunning ploy? One evening, as the courtyard bustled with the glow of campfires, Jon joined Slice near an upper gallery overlooking the throng of soldiers. Hundreds of tents spread beyond the walls, the dull roar of voices rising like a tide. The fortress felt alive, braced for a confrontation that might reshape the Seven Kingdoms. She leaned against the stone balustrade. Look at them all, Jon. They came to us for leadership, for a chance at freedom. I want to do right by them. But I can't pretend to be something I'm not, some righteous conqueror or beloved savior. He stepped closer, resting a hand on hers. They don't need a conqueror or a saint. They need a figure they can trust, one who won't betray them for gold or power. And you've proven your resolve. You stood against the Lannisters once and didn't break. They admire that. She turned, her gaze lingering on him. The torchlight painted amber lines across her face. And you, Jon? They admire you too. The stories of the White Wolf, the man who gave up a crown to save the North. Whether you like it or not, you're a symbol. Together, we're... He finished softly, we're hope for some, and a threat for others. Ghost appeared at the end of the gallery, his paws silent on the stone. He patted over, pressing his muzzle against Jon's leg. Slice laid a hand gently on the direwolf's head as if reaffirming the bond between all three. The night air carried a fresh tang of salt from the bay, intermingled with the earthy smell of so many men camped together. Slice exhaled. We'll face what comes. The Stormlands have always thrived on challenge. If the entire realm chooses to rise against the Lannisters, maybe we can spare future generations more cycles of endless war. Jon nodded. That's our hope, at least. He drew her close, letting his forehead rest against hers for a moment in a tender gesture. They stood like that, savoring the fleeting calm, while the gathered host murmured below, a mixture of old grievances and new ambitions swirling in the coastal wind. Within days, ravens arrived confirming that Cersei now knew of the coalition forming at Storm's End. The tone of letters from King's Landing turned from demands to open fury. One message threatened that foreign sellswords would arrive within the month, ready to trample any who stood against the Iron Throne. Another claimed that certain Stormlander lords still loyal to the crown would rise up from within. But no actual proof of such internal treachery surfaced, and the men who had joined from the Reach scoffed at the idea. Still, the threat of infiltration lingered. Spies were inevitable. Night after night, couriers and outriders reported glimpses of the next Lannister move. Large caravans leaving King's Landing, possibly heading west to meet new mercenary companies disembarking on the coast near Cracklaw Point. If that was true, the Lannisters might march south from there, hoping to surprise the Stormlands. Or they could strike at the rebels in the Reach. Uncertainty gnawed at every council meeting, fueling frantic strategy sessions. Slice and Jon weighed the idea of a preemptive strike. If they moved quickly, could they ambush the Lannister forces before the mercenaries arrived? Connington favored that plan, wanting to carry the fight to the enemy. But Davos cautioned that leaving Storm's End too lightly garrisoned might invite a flank attack. The arguments wove late into the night. Thunder rumbled in the distance as though urging a decisive move. In the end, they opted to fortify their positions rather than gamble on an aggressive thrust. The combined force of Stormlanders and Reachmen took up strategic points from the northern borders of the Stormlands down to the southern roads that led toward King's Landing. Towers were manned, signals arranged, cavalry patrols dispatched. Each day, they trained relentlessly, a ragtag assembly slowly molded into something resembling a cohesive army. Then, in the second month of this uneasy gathering, a rider approached from the Rose Road brandishing a banner that none expected to see, a white falcon on a sky-blue field. The sigil of House Aaron. The Vale had largely kept to itself since the War of the Five Kings, becoming an isolated holdfast under Lord Robin Arryn's guardianship. For them to arrive here now meant a seismic shift. The rider, a lean knight with a traveling cloak,